Welcome to Ultimate Combat Radio, Utah's only all mixed martial arts radio show. Mike Stidham here, bringing you the latest news in the world of mixed martial arts, the coolest sport on the planet. Now, it's Friday, the 23rd day of December. It is the eve of Christmas Eve. And, this is my favorite time of year. I love the holidays. You wouldn't guess it. Well, I kind of look like, I resemble Santa Claus in many ways, but I do. I want to thank you for taking time out of your holiday season to tune us in. And if you're listening to us, you're probably out and about in a vehicle, probably somewhere close to a shopping mall, trying to get into the parking lot somehow, and you're preparing for what may be the biggest fight of the year for you, and that is Christmas shopping. Getting in and trying to pound it out with somebody, and hopefully listening to Ultimate Combat Radio here will maybe give you that edge that you need to get that special gift for that special someone.
I heard you almost got in a fist fight with somebody.
It wasn't a fist fight. I took a really mean elbow to the ribs by when I turned around was a little old lady, and I was so impressed. I wanted to hug her.
What were you going after, Mike?
I was just turned around looking at AJ, and we were headed toward the iPhone store to get my iPhone 4S, by the way.
He was going for the Snuggie.
And I just turned around, and apparently she was heading in a different direction and saw me coming, and it was fully intentional. There's no way this was accidental. She put that elbow out and gave me a good one, and I was just so proud of her. I was like, that was pretty awesome, lady. Good job.
You did get the phone you were after?
I got it, man.
And it's everything it's cracked up to be.
And then some.
All right.
And the thing, I haven't even gotten into what it does. I haven't even gotten a chance to sit down with the little booklet and go through it. It's that cool.
All right.
All right, enough of the niceties. Last week we had an in-studio guest that it prompted really the biggest response that we've ever had, and I'm talking about TV show, radio show. I've talked a lot of smack over the years, and I've really made some people mad over the years, and I've made some people very happy over the years. But this, whatever reason, this one topic 20 years later creates still an emotionally charged response. And I had people come out of the woodwork, both good and bad. I had people I haven't heard from in a long time that I was really happy to hear from. And I had people that came out of the woodwork that I just wasn't so happy to hear from. But it was a lot of fun. This last week was fun. I fielded a lot of emotional responses. Now, if you didn't tune in last week, Lance Batchelor, first of all, he's been painted as this really bad guy. In fact, I think Kensei posted on Facebook, he goes, boy, I'm excited to see his interview because he looks like a bad guy in the video. And he is. He's kind of painted as a villain. And, he came into the in studio here, and he was actually our badass of the week, not for his exploits in the cage, because he cures cancer literally for a living. And he's a very soft-spoken sweetheart of a man, and certainly not the guy that you would expect to have been in the first MMA fight in Utah State history. And he came on the show last week, and there's been a lot of controversy over the last 20 years over who won the fight that he was in, whether he won it, he lost it, and a lot of the people that follow Pedro Sauer, are very adamantly insisting on the fact that Pedro won that fight. Well, let's be honest. It's 20 years later. We've all grown up a little bit, and we've all kind of moved on, and so we're just kind of doing this for argument's sake. This is talk radio, it's sports talk radio. We're going to talk about it a little bit. I don't care what you think. Don't drive by my house and throw fire bombs or anything like that. If you're that serious about it, don't worry. Just let it go. So we all sat down before we came into the studio here and watched the tape. You guys remember doing that?
Yes.
Okay. So, I got some blank stares from you. So what I want to do is we're going to score this fight. Finally, we're going to score it. It's never been scored before, but I want to kind of present a couple of arguments. First of all, when this fight happened, there were no timed rounds. And there was no scoring. This was back in the day of UFC 1. So you can't really score a fight, especially if you're using that mindset, which was what you have to do because that's when the fight occurred. It occurred back in the early 90s. So you kind of have to follow that. But for argument's sake, we're gonna actually score it two ways. We're going to use the 10-point must system that we currently use, and we're going to look at what occurred in the fight. And the only thing we have to look at is the edited tape. But I want you as an individual, you've watched it, and you can determine what you feel like you saw happen and what you feel like maybe might have happened in the unedited version. And I did run down an unedited version of it. I just haven't gotten my hands on it yet. It's on VHS, so I've got to get that. Ron Harrison is the guy who put all this thing together. And Ron, by the way, I learned everything I know about promoting from Ron Harrison. He's a guy that he saw an opportunity here and he ran with it. And I didn't know all this until just again, when I came into this situation, my mother had just passed away, and I didn't know all the ancillary things that were going on with this. I learned after the fact. In fact, I learned just this last week that they raised like $10,000 for the Make-A-Wish Foundation putting this fight on, and I didn't realize that they had done. I didn't know they'd sold tickets or anything like that. Fortunately, I'd walked in the door and nobody said anything to me about buying a ticket or anything. But so I didn't know that had happened, and maybe that's why we all didn't go to jail for it, because it was done for a charitable cause. So Ron put this thing together and did a great job of it. But I digress. Let's go back to the fight itself. If you remember the time, right around that time where Chemo just destroyed Royce Gracie, and then Royce ends up winning that fight, nobody even mentions the fact that Chemo destroyed him. They just mention the fact that fight was that Royce Gracie won the fight. And when we stepped into into this situation, we were given very specific rules that this fight was going to be governed by, and that is, unless somebody taps or is unconscious, we're not going to stop it. Well, that's not what happened. The fight was stopped, and nobody tapped, and nobody was unconscious. So, by default, the argument I'm making here is doesn't Lance win by default because you stopped it? He didn't stop it. You know what I mean? So, there's that argument. And again, it's just for argument's sake. Don't firebomb my house. So,
it's amazing how even this how long it's been.
Yeah.
Even intelligent, good people who I'm on the mat with on a regular basis, they throw their brains right out the window when this topic comes up. I mean, people are so passionate about this. It's amazing.
My own instructor wanted to fight me the other day. It kind of seemed that way, didn't it?
Yeah, he did. He was a little upset about it.
So, so keeping in mind again that when they say that either somebody had to tap or be unconscious, knowing Lonnie Foster the way we know Lonnie Foster or knew Lonnie Foster, unconscious was kind of a loose term because I remember Salvador Sanchez getting knocked into next week in his first fight in our show. He was completely unconscious for about 30 seconds, yet the fight continued, and Salvador came back and won that fight. So Lonnie was very you had to kill somebody to get him to stop a fight.
He was as liberal of a ref as you could get.
So the fact that he stopped it, again, it just kind of, and his later explanation was that, it was a powder keg in that room and we wanted to get the heck out of there, which I fully accept as, honesty.
And especially at that time, because I think he even got more conservative in his later years of reffing, but back then it was really anything goes.
And that was the mentality of the sport back then. And I don't want to belittle you guys, but you were in diapers at the time, Joe. He was 8 years old.
8 years old.
But I mean, we're talking about this, and it just kind of makes me laugh a little bit that a lot of the people that are even listeners and that are even very emotionally tied to this were in diapers or close to it at the time this happened. So it's funny to me that you kind of see that element of it. So let's go ahead and you're a judge, Joe. You watched the fight. Let's use the 10-point must system. Who won the fight and why?
Lance, 10-9. He controlled the fight. He was on top. He got swept and rolled, I think, twice. Mm-hmm. I think Lance wins the fight.
And he got the takedown.
Yeah, and he got the takedown. And he landed punches. They cut away, but you can see him clearly land punches a few times.
Okay, Robertina, what's your call on this?
I'm gonna side with Joe. I agree with everything he said.
Ooh, whoa! Now let's talk to Brandon Kiser. What do you think?
I'm gonna go 10-9 for Pedro because he was more effective in the stand-up exchanges. Lance did score the takedown, which makes that pretty even. Lance was a little more effective he was more effective with punching on the ground, but Pedro had the near submission. So I don't think you could argue the decision could go either way for that one round. It depends on if the judge scores heavier for kickboxing or for a wrestling takedown. I mean, does Pedro landing punches standing, is that just completely nullified by one takedown that was done in desperation? Or if you're more of a wrestling background judge, you're going to be like, hey, the guy got the takedown, man. He's controlling where the fight goes. And then same thing on the ground. Do you give more weight to the guy that's doing more damage with the punching, or do you give more weight to the jiu-jitsu guy that appears to have the other fighter in trouble or close to tapping with the submission?
Great stuff. Doesn't that kind of really outline what a faulty system that we do have? I mean, because it's so subjective.
It is very subjective,
and so it's a very flawed system that somehow has survived all this time. So it looks like we've got 2 out of 3 voting for Lance. Okay, and so we've got the 10 point. Now Brandon being the dissenting, I'm going to give him. Now let's talk about how we would judge it back in that time frame, in that era, because, again, there was no real – we don't award you for takedowns. We don't award you for punching even. We just award the guy at the end who won. And, this being a case that nobody really won, I personally feel it was headed in a direction because Lance didn't have any tools in his toolbox to finish that fight. As time goes on, especially those muscles get heavy. And you're just going to become more and more fatigued. And clearly Pedro had the tools to apply arm bars and to do those type things to finish the fight. I don't think at the point that the fight was stopped that Lance even had enough back in him to punch effectively enough to try to knock him out. So laying that foundation, what do you think about just kind of looking at it from that perspective, from that day in that era?
I think it was just a matter of time before Pedro did catch him.
Right.
It is interesting. We are judging a tape that was edited. I mean, I would like to see the original tape, but that we're beating a dead horse with that. We have what we have. I totally agree. Lance, there was no tool that he was. If he couldn't have finished that fight with the initial exchanges of striking, he wasn't going to finish it later on.
Right.
The decision at the end. When I remembered back, I remembered him being more in a standing position, guarding the armbar, and I thought, with what you'd said, the guy had short, thick arms.
Right,
I thought, wow, that would be hard to finish. After watching the tape again, there is another angle where it looks like he's starting to fall belly down, which I think is harder to escape.
Yeah.
And would sort of indicate that maybe the armbar was getting more intense at that point. If he would have still been standing and protecting his arms the way I originally remembered it, I would have
I'll tell you, your original memory is correct because he does sit up, and the tape ends, which is unfortunate because you don't see the tape ending with Lonnie Foster stepping in and stopping the fight. You see the tape end.
Yeah, there's some very, I don't care, either way. Lance is a nice guy. Pedro's a nice guy. I don't have any vested interest. It means nothing to me. But there's some really weird stuff that happens at the end of that. Yeah. And like I said, the original tape, I thought Lance was up in a really strong position, and I thought Mike's argument, wow, that would be hard to finish that guy from there.
Right.
And then this last one I watched, he's kind of like laying down, and then he gets up and he's down, and there was definitely something fishy going on at the end of that.
All right, so you're with Pedro still on this one, then? Are you Pedro?
Yeah. Either way,
and I kind of agree with Robertina. How do you feel about that?
I call a draw. How many fights have you seen where one guy is completely winning and then the other guy comes out of nowhere and wins?
We've seen a lot of that lately.
Exactly.
Actually.
So it's nothing that didn't happen in that fight. So I call a draw.
And I'll be honest with you, Robertina. Usually, I'm going to be all over somebody that calls a draw because I think God, come on, make a decision, go one way or the other. But I think this is one of those cases where I'm going to cut you some slack because I think that's a. I think it's justifiable. It's
Nobody
arguable.
tapped,
Absolutely.
so I call a draw.
What do you say, Joe?
You say those muscles are, they get heavy and it's hard to go on.
And
forever.
I know that firsthand.
But a guy that big on top of you for that long is tiring too. So Pedro could have tired out too, and he could have been on bottom for a long time without anything happening with Lance laying on top of him. But I still got to score it. Person on top, I think, is me looking at it back then. I wouldn't know MMA. Now I look at it and I know what everything is, but. Back then, I would have looked at it and said, "Oh, the guy on top's obviously winning."
You didn't know MMA when you were 8?
Well, you know what I mean. Like nobody knew MMA back then, so
That's the thing that I think the only argument for Pedro really is that he's the only one. They did know MMA. I mean, he's from part of the Gracie clan. They knew it. They knew what they were doing, and so Lance didn't, and so that argument kind of goes both ways. He didn't know if he didn't know how to tap. How would he have finished this guy? But at the same time, it ended how it was. It did it, and so now we've got I think that would be a draw.
Yeah.
Right down the middle.
I'll tell you another thing I found interesting, having watched it with you the second time before the show today, was how they really put a lot, and I've heard a lot over the years with all the hype around this about how Lance was so oiled up and greased up. And I noticed as he was walking in, he had a towel on, and whoever was cornering him was rubbing him down with the towel, which would have been totally counterproductive to greasing him up. You would think that they'd want to preserve that. So
firsthand, that was completely the opposite. That Pedro had Vaseline on his face, and Lance didn't have any oil on him. I can say that personally because I watched them walk in, and if you watch Pedro, he's pretty greased up. And it's just his face. I mean, he was under a gi otherwise, but and that's what you do in a fight. You grease up the face. That's what you do. They knew to do that. Lance didn't.
Big guys sweat.
Well, yes, they do. Lake Joe has been seen on the mat a couple times. Lake Mike as well. So, all right, there you have it. We've officially scored the bout. We're going to put it in the record books. We're going to go Lance Batchelor. And if you have a different opinion, Robertina, how could they go about voicing it?
They can call us at 470-570 or 670-1280. Text us at 53318. Text in zone and your opinion.
All right. Well, I want to throw a great big radio kiss to Lance Batchelor for fighting on my behalf. I mean, I tried to stay really neutral on this thing. In fact, I didn't even be one of the judges here. I'm going to be Lonnie Foster on this one because, but he fought a fight for me, I mean, you got to kind of give a guy respect for that, especially a guy who's never fought before. So
a guy that doesn't fight, that's curing cancer, that is such a humble, nice human being. I mean, that's got to make you feel good for sure.
Yep. And, and then I want to also, kind of give a shout out to Ron Harrison. He did this for charity. He was the original master promoter here. So I mean, I got to give him lots of credit. And then also Ron did point out one thing, that when this all went down and Kazika tore his gi off and he was ready to attack, Tui, my old karate instructor, stepped between us and said, "You got to get through me before you get to him." And I totally forgotten about that until Ron reminded me about that. So much love to Tui. And if nothing else, it was a great trip down memory lane for me. And I hope you enjoyed some of it because it is a piece of Utah mixed martial arts history. Now, before we put this baby to rest, you guys have any last comments on it?
Yeah, I'm just curious. What do you think about the overall marketing strategy of the Gracies? And everybody says it was brilliant and it worked, but I mean more from you're originally a traditional martial artist, a kickboxer, you owned a gym. What do you think about that approach of how they, got their art out there and the challenges and the disrespect that happened at so many gyms? I mean,
well, I think it was a huge mistake. First of all, they killed themselves. And the reason Art Davies didn't continue to own the UFC is because it was plummeting. It was going to go under, and they would have gone under. And they were victims of their own marketing. They did act barbaric. And they did, the way they presented it was very, it turned the average guy off. I'm a fight guy, and so, I mean, I dig it, but I can see how most people would say, man, that should be illegal. And they made it illegal in so many places because of that attitude. So I think it was a flawed approach. I think what they could have come out and done a lot of different things, a lot of better things to present their art. The concept originally to go one art against the other, I liked it. I thought it was cool, but it was the way they presented it, and it was very barbaric, and they almost marketed themselves out of business. And you'll even see now today the UFC, they'll get a little edgy sometimes, but when they started trying to woo Fox, they really scaled things back. They really tried to make it more mainstream and more something that the average Joe can have an appetite for. Whereas I think had that group stayed in charge, they would have gone out of business.
So you're speaking really still to the business side and in regards to the UFC. What about just from a martial arts perspective, like you have this system that you think is the best way to go out and promote it, to go challenge everyone you can, shove people around, start fights, and go into their gyms and do these kind of things. I mean, how do you feel about that?
I think Pedro Sauer would tell you that if somebody did that in his gym today, he would be completely floored by it. I mean, that's completely, it was wrong, and they did that at the time, and for whatever reason, it kind of, was successful for them, but it was wrong. It was a poor tact, and I don't, we were kind of, my karate school was kind of what do you call it, Cobra Kai. I mean, we were kind of roughnecks ourselves, but we were always very respectful. And when it was time to be respectful and it was time to be the tough guy, that's two different times.
All right.
Oh, well, good stuff. Again, anything, Joe? Any parting words on this?
No, man. I know it's something. I wasn't around for all of this, at the beginning, so it's kind of hard for me to talk about it. So.
Well, we're glad you're around now. All right, coming up in the next segment, we're going to be calling Mike Arendt and Matt Kovacs. Both guys will be competing in the upcoming WCFC Last Man Standing tournament, and looking forward to talking to them. And then, of course, we're going to be chit-chatting with Joe Martinez about all the things going on in the UFC and what's going on in the world of mixed martial arts. And then to wrap the program up, we're going to talk about managers. Who needs them? All of that and more when we come back on Ultimate Combat Radio.